So let me set the scene for you. It's Saturday, September 17th, 1983. It's a warm, muggy, hot night in Cincinnati, Ohio. 53,790 fans have descended upon Cincinnati's Riverfront Stadium. They're there to watch the Reds play the Houston Astros. The Reds are terrible in 1983. They're below 500. They're near the cellar of their division. They're out of it. This game is statistically meaningless. So why are they showing up? Because it's Johnny Bench night. I see some faces of appreciation. Johnny Bench, he was finishing his 17th season. He'd played more than 2,100 games in his number 5 uniform. He had won the National League Rookie of the Year, been named to 14 All-Star teams, won 2 National League Most Valuable Player awards, and with teammates like Tony Perez and Pete Rose and Joe Morgan, he'd won 2 World Series rings. And it was all coming to a bold, celebratory end. So why am I telling you this? I was raised in small-town Ohio, and I was a Reds fan. I wasn't a country club kid or a summer camp kid. I was a baseball kid. It was baseball every day, all day for me. And although I was a relatively small, freckle-faced, red-headed kid, destined to one day grow up to be a relatively small, no longer freckle-faced, red-headed man, Johnny Bench was my hero. In fact, I was Johnny Bench. I watched or listened to every game, and I tried to model my style of play after Johnny. I crouched behind the plate just like Johnny. I flashed my signs to the pitcher just like Johnny. I even learned to catch one-handed like Johnny Bench. Now, other than the fact that I could never hit the curveball and I had a very weak throwing arm, I was just like Johnny Bench. So for the non-baseball fans out there, Bench was arguably the greatest catcher in the history of the game. And I couldn't imagine my Cincinnati Reds, let alone Major League Baseball, without him. So back to that September night in 1983. Johnny Bench's last week in Johnny Bench's home stadium. Johnny Bench hits a game-tying home run, the 389th of his career. Let's listen to Joe Nuxall, the famed announcer, call that.
The 0-1. Swung on and hit well to left field. Get out of here, baseball! He scored! Oh, my God, can you believe it? Johnny Bench has tied it up. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. He makes the tour, and I'll tell you what, you can't write anything like that.
You can't write anything like that, right? Last game. So later that week, Bench takes off his number 5 uniform one last time. He hangs it up. He calls it a day. We never get to watch Johnny Bench play baseball again. But here's the thing. We also never had to watch Johnny Bench go way over the hill. And because of that, his Hall of Fame legacy remains intact today. It's hard to leave. Very few do it well, and the sports fans out there probably have some players in mind who, unlike Bench, reached the peak of their career and kept on going all the way down, and their public struggles only served to undermine all they built during an entire career. So for the baseball fans, again, maybe Willie Mays comes to mind. Those last 2 seasons in a Mets uniform, really painful to watch. Or how about football fans? Green Bay Packers great Brett Favre in a New York Jets uniform? Really, really awful. Maybe they stuck around for the money. Maybe they stuck around because they thought they still had it and no one was telling them otherwise. Or maybe they stuck around because they had no idea what to do with themselves after they were done playing baseball. But stick around they did. Look, why am I telling you this? Why am I regaling you with stories about my childhood baseball fantasies? And why am I talking about over-the-hill athletes clinging on to glory? Because as Dave said, recently I find myself in a similar situation. After almost 19 years of leading my company, Michelman, at the end of this year, so just about 6 months from now, I'm taking off my CEO uniform one last time and handing it to my successor. I'm taking on a new role as the executive chairman, but my CEO tenure comes to the end on New Year's Eve, or what I'm choosing to call Steve Shifman night. So look, I like being the CEO. Being CEO is awesome. I don't have to tell all you guys that. I've loved wearing my CEO uniform every day for these last 19 years. From the tailored clothes, to the first-class travel, having access to the airplane hasn't sucked. Being the CEO has challenged and stretched me. It's taken me around the world multiple times. It's put me in the rooms where it happened. It's introduced me to people like you. Being the CEO has given me a sense of personal and professional satisfaction that wildly exceeded the expectations of that redheaded, freckle-faced kid from Springfield, Ohio. So, as Mel Brooks makes quite clear,
It's good to be the king.
it's good to be the king. But as the Buddha teaches us, nothing is permanent. Everything comes to an end, even my sweet CEO gig. So I'm hoping to follow in Johnny Bench's footsteps and leave on top. So what would leaving on top look like for me? As I worked through this process over the last couple of years with my board, with my wife, with my partners, I set 3 bold goals. Goals that if we could achieve them, we would know that we were managing this really emotional and challenging transition in the right way. First, when we made the announcement, the response from all of my associates and our stakeholders would be, that makes sense. We hate to see Steve go, but this is a great choice. Goal number 2, the Harvard Business Review would be clamoring to do a cover article on how we at Michelman, but mostly me, got this so right. Because as we know, right, most CEO transitions go very poorly. In fact, according to a recent HBR article, 50 to 60% of all new CEOs fail within the first 18 months. And those big, splashy fails get all the press. How great will it be to read a real success story? And number 3, I'd be leaving not only happily, but enthusiastic about my next act. So how do we do? For that first bold, make sense goal, I'm gonna give it a check. Look, I hope my associates miss me at least a little bit, but my evergreen company is really excited to know that we have a plan. And as to my successor, he's a really talented guy. He's a known entity, hard worker, smart, engaged, happens to be my cousin, so more on that a little later. As to that next bold HBR goal, look, I'm not sure we're getting the HBR cover, but we really should. They haven't called yet. But even if they don't call, we have the satisfaction to know that they should be calling us, and at least we did get the cover of Family Business magazine, right? So that was my second choice, Harvard Business Review, Family Business. As to that third, bold, enthusiastic about my future goal, I'm gonna give it a cautiously optimistic check. I won't lie to you. I'm struggling with this. This is really hard for me. I've loved being the CEO. And like most of you, being the CEO has really been more than a job. It's really been part of my identity for these past 19 years, and it's hard to shed or change one's identity. So as I anticipate what's coming next, I regularly find myself waking with the flop sweats. And although I really can intellectually look forward and know that I've got a lot to look forward to, I still wrestle with the uncertainty about what my next act might hold. But I'm choosing to pass our evergreen leadership baton to the next runner on our team. So, that's me. You know, what I want to hopefully leave you with today is the knowledge that when leadership transitions are done well, there's a very clear why, when, and how to the process. Really great leadership transitions, particularly evergreen leadership transitions, aren't left to chance and they're not random. Now I look around the room and I see a ton of young CEOs here, and I'm pretty good at reading minds. And I can get the sense that many of you think that this doesn't apply to you, at least not yet. I get it. I too spent the bulk of my career as the youngest guy in every room, but this happens. And it happens quickly. So let me make this really clear, and I hope you pay attention. You will all one day no longer be the CEO of your company. So let that sink in for just a second. What was once seemingly an endless amount of time to reach all of your goals and objectives does come to an end. And that end will only arrive in one of a few very distinct flavors. First, you might be asked out. You might overstay your welcome or do something stupid, and then your board or your partners or other stakeholders pack your stuff in a box and walk you out the door. You might die in office. Either something happens tragically, or again, you overstay your welcome until it's way too late. You might stick around too long without naming a successor and watching everything you've all worked so hard to build fade away due to a lack of real, clear, evergreen leadership. You might get perp walked out the door, Bernie Madoff style. It could happen. Look, I'm not anticipating that from an evergreen CEO. But if you're willing to listen to my advice, you'll be far more intentional about this, and you'll own your own transition. And that is the why. Being intentional is the why. So back to me for a second. While I'm 63 years old, I consider myself to be a curious, engaged, energetic, fit, active 63. In my mind, I could do this for another 20 years. But you know what? That wouldn't be right for the business. Although I'm growing in wisdom, and that role will be important, that'll be really an important part of my executive chair job, I'm just not as passionate about the business as I once was. While I used to wake up in the middle of every night, like probably most of you do, with some wild idea about the business, now I just wake up to pee. And although I still do love to travel, the thought of those early morning wake-up calls to catch yet one more international flight, just not as romantic as they used to be, right? So once again, my passions for the business are different, but the business needs the kind of passion and energy that I once had. So again, in our case, it's time for us to start thinking about that transition. All right, so let's say that you buy the premise. You get that one day you won't be the CEO anymore, and you get that it's better to be intentional than being dragged out by your ankles. So then the question is, when do I go about doing that? Look, it's different for all of you, and there's no algorithm. I've tried. Siri, when should I stop being CEO? Right? I also tried Google Home, Alexa, IBM's Watson. Nothing, no luck, no algorithm. But let me tell you what I did to work on my when. First, I engaged really actively with my board. I'm presuming that you've all got a board of advisors or directors, experienced, thoughtful, wise, engaged professionals. Great boards realize that amongst the most important things they'll ever do in the service of you and your business is to help you on transition. So I urge you to engage your board early in the process. Next, I spent a lot of time with my wife on this topic. And yes, she too exceeded the wildest dreams of this redheaded, freckle-faced kid from Springfield, Ohio. So trust me, my when seriously impacts her. And so once again, I'm presuming you all have a spouse or a partner or just a great friend who cares deeply about you. Engage them with humility because they know you best. They'll help you to think through your when. And finally, I spent a lot of time thinking about my business. Michelman is playing for the ages. We're an evergreen company like you all are. And having dynamic, contemporary, engaged, passionate leadership now driving us towards that vision is incredibly important. So I had to ask myself, am I still that guy right now, today? I ask you all to do the same thing, right? Are you the ones today to drive your business towards your future? It's hard to ask those questions. But as humble evergreen CEOs, we know that the business always comes first, right? And so asking the question about whether there's somebody else, a partner, an emerging leader, some family member who might do an even better job than you right now to drive that business to the future. So I concluded that for me, as I said a little earlier, the time was right to begin thinking about that transition. So once again, that's us. Once you start then getting your head around the when, then, of course, the question, how? How do I make the transition? Actually, in our case, having the when conversation was the first step in the how. So once we had picked a date, at least directionally, I informed my board, my partners, my family. Effectively, I scuttled the landing craft. There was no turning back. And once that process was underway, then here were the steps that we took to drive our transition at Michelman. The first step was to select and develop a successor, obviously, right? If you're going to transition your leadership role, you need someone to transition your leadership to. Michelman, my company, is a 73-year-old multi-generational business, and we're planning for the next 73. And my partners and I have concluded that in a perfect world, we prefer a member of our family to lead the business. Now, we realize the world's not always perfect, and there may be times in the future when we don't have anyone ready to lead, but I can tell you that my partner, Rick Michelman, name's on the building, will do an outstanding job of leading our business. Rick is really a talented guy. But as Dave said, we announced a couple of weeks ago to our associates and broadly to our stakeholders that we were making this transition. My first thought at the time was, Rick's not ready. Now, he was my presumptive successor for about the past decade, and it's taken us a decade's worth of work to get him ready to take over as the CEO and to get him to this point. And that preparation included a bunch of things. We had an executive coach for Rick. We got him an executive MBA. He had a ton of work and leadership experience, community board responsibilities. He had a Michelman board member as a mentor. I did a ton of mentoring and development of Rick. And you know what? After all that work, I'm still not ready. But here's the thing. Your successors won't be ready. I wasn't ready. You weren't ready when you became CEOs. How can you be ready until you actually do the job? So once again, that's why I'm so insistent upon engaging with your board early in the process, because they're going to help you through this. They've seen it before, and they'll make sure that both you and the successor are as ready as possible. So that's the first thing that we did. Next, I engaged really actively with my executive coach. I have the privilege of having had a phenomenal coach for the last number of years. And when we started talking about transition, I engaged with Eric very actively, and he was really helpful for me. Unfortunately, it seems like to many people, the thought of having a coach is punitive, right? I'm suggesting to you all that having a coach is a tremendous, tremendous gift. As we know, most high performers work with coaches, professional athletes. So Roger Federer, maybe the most talented man ever to hold a racket, winner of 20 majors, still works with a coach today. LeBron James, arguably best basketball player on planet Earth, still works with a coach. Dustin Johnson, the tour's #1, works with a coach. I think you get my point, right? Great performers work with great coaches. And in addition, the transition of leadership in your businesses is a team sport. And we know that great teams need a great coach. And finally, and most importantly, I spent a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time figuring out what happens after I'm done being CEO. And as I said earlier, I won't lie to you, this is really hard for me. It's emotional. This has been a great journey, and I've loved being the CEO. So as I project forward, I spent a lot of time thinking about what might come next. Where am I going to find the purpose and the meaning that I have found as a CEO? And I challenge all of you to begin that process now, to start thinking about what your life after CEO might look like. What are some of those things you've always wanted to do but haven't given yourself a chance to try them? Do you want to teach? Do you want to write? Do you want to consult? Do you want to do more charitable work like Tom? Do you want to do more, activities, sports? Do you want to get another job, right? The data is clear. Those of us who have something important and compelling to do with our lives when we're no longer CEO will have a far easier time of making that transition happen. Personally, I'm wrestling with building a portfolio of things that will keep me actively engaged. So in addition to my Michelman work, I'm going to do executive coaching and consulting and board work and writing and speaking. I love to travel and cycle and ski and play tennis and all that kind of stuff, but there are still those flop sweats. There's still that uncertainty, again, about where I'm going to find the personal satisfaction that I have gotten from being the CEO. So, look, as we know, it's really good to be the king, right?
It's good to be the king.
Sorry, I just love that movie. But we are not kings. We are evergreen CEOs of evergreen companies, right? So I started today by talking about my baseball hero, Johnny Bench. And I want to wrap up with another hero of mine, George Washington, the father of our country and the first president of the United States. Now let me ask you, could anybody else have wrapped Johnny Bench and George Washington into the same talk? I don't think so. So you remember from your history books that after Washington had led our entrepreneurial ragtag troops to spectacular victory, and after he'd served 2 terms as the first president of the United States, he was revered, he was loved. The people were clamoring for Washington to stay, to continue to lead, to effectively become our king. But Washington knew better. He knew that our evergreen nation needed to establish a tradition of fresh, new, dynamic, contemporary leadership. So Washington knew that he had to leave, and leave he did. And in Washington's farewell address, or at least his farewell address as imagined by Lin-Manuel Miranda in Hamilton, he said, or he sang these words: "If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone." Well, maybe I didn't make a nation, but I'd like to think that I did my part to help make Michelman a great company, a company that my family, my associates, all of my stakeholders, my community can be proud of. And while I could stick around a little longer, like Washington, I'm going to teach them how to say goodbye. So, thank you.